You're listening to Words and Music, an audio series exploring the life and work of Indiana writers. The nonprofit arts and humanities organization Big R Collaborative produces this show, and it airs first on 99.1 WQRT LP Indianapolis. Words and Music is made possible thanks to a grant from Indiana Humanities. I'm Jim Walker. In this episode, Indianapolis-based author Susan Neville and I talk with poet Roger Mitchell about his deep interest in preserving the legacy of Indiana-born poet Jean Garrigue. Mitchell, now retired from Indiana University, ran the school's MFA program. He lives in upstate New York and now spends much of his time researching and writing an in-depth exploration of Garrigue's life and work. Mitchell, the author of numerous books of poetry and a work of nonfiction himself, hopes to see this project soon become a published biography of Garrigue, someone he never met before her death in 1972. Before we start our conversation, here's a little background on the person eventually known as poet Jean Garrigue. She was born in Evansville, Indiana in 1912 to a middle-class family. Her name then was Gertrude Louise Garrige. After attending Shortridge High School and Butler College in Indianapolis, she earned her BA from the University of Chicago and an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop. At 27 years old, Jean Garrigue then moved to Greenwich Village, rooming for a while with Indiana author Marguerite Young. A year later, Garrigue published her first poem in a major journal as she launched a challenging but successful career of teaching writing at a variety of universities and publishing 7 collections of poetry and a novella. Taking her own approach to love, Garrigue formed complex relationships with several other well-known writers and artists throughout her lifetime. She also relished traveling the world, often writing about love of people and places in her work. Garrigue's poems shared in this episode are read by Shauta Marsh. If someone said to you, why should I care about Jean's work, or why, could you just crystallize that, or her person, why is she so important to you, and but also to us?
I enjoy the fighter in her, the person who has a good idea of what goodness is and decides that she has to spend her life finding it and defending it, and also, struggling against the various forces in the world that would prevent it. And she was a feminist from her early days. I mean, Carrie Nation was a sort of hero for her, and and she stood up for an independence for herself and for women in general. And she had to do this in the family, which was often a difficult thing, particularly with her older brother. Ross was 18 years older than she, and just could not understand why Jean was so set upon being herself. And, he said one time, well, you're not going to find a man, that way. And he lashed back at him with something like, well, don't you worry, I'll be all right. But she was defending you might say a brand new kind of sense of love, which, was brave of her, and it created horrible pains too, because even though she was able to talk to people in her life, Stanley Kunitz and Josephine Herbst, into loving her in the way that she thought people should love. That one, you know, I might actually have other friends in a relationship. Neither of these people was ever happy in that arrangement, and as a result, neither was Jean. But she would not give it up, and she believed in um, um, what today we call polyamory, and she suffered for it, but it also coincided with, there was the kind of love that people valued in the world was one which put the people in it, the man and the woman, into the business of constructing a family and working for the family and its comforts and so on and so forth, and essentially giving up the artistic and aesthetic and, you might say, spiritual ambitions that artists have to have in order to do their art. And she used her art to, in fact, find and locate forms of um, spiritual value and great love that just were not available to a conventional middle class lifestyle. And I admire her fortitude and strength in carrying forward on that. And it's the thing that allowed her to produce the great jewels of poetry that we know, which put us in touch with uh, uh, forms of joy and love, which can't be found any other way or in any other place. However much any individual might experience emotionally in a great day of their life, um, all these kinds of things, it's another thing altogether to be able to hold it in place and construct it in words or in paint or in sculpture, and those things continue to be things to which we turn for the greatest comfort and assurance that being a human being is okay and is even a whole lot better than okay. It's a kind of, parallel to a religion. There's no doubt about it. She was constructing a system of belief, but doing it with, with no Bible or theology, but just fierce, you know, conviction and and the belief in the larger forms of, to use her you might say her buzzword, love, the larger forms of love that are around us all the time, and but are invisible, you know. Uh,
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
exactly what she says here. It's how to find love does survive. All kinds of things survive. Creation
yeah,
is as true as
yeah,
destruction. It's how to find the order of language that will sound also the note of something more than change, the
yeah,
permanent as we hear it in music and poetry, the
yeah.
permanence of delight.
From a letter
by Jean Garrigue to Virginia Herman, November 11th, 1970. What we're all living through socially is a time of loss of faith in nearly everything. We have no heroes now, and nobody is wanting to hang on and endure for the sake of something larger, for the sake of a sensed large sense of order. So all is in ferment, upheaval, and disenchantment is profound. This is a part of the large envelope that is acting upon us, all of us. We are in a stream of history crazily turbulent with no end in sight except total environmental destruction, etc. But need I repeat what we all know? In the meantime, we are trying to save ourselves, save what we can. I've got to find another way around my confession, my admission of total mortality. Another way by language. The poem cannot end on the upbeat, on any sense of resolution, of gifted new insight. It has to square with the pain with which it began, but yet a kind of larger knowing has to be suggested. Love does survive. All kinds of things survive. Creation is as true as destruction. It's how to find the order of language that will sound also the note of something more than change. The permanent, as we hear it in music and poetry. The permanence of delight and Blake's energy.
Roger, you mentioned when you retired that you went to Shortridge High School and discovered that Jean Garrigue was from Indianapolis.
By the time I was, going up to Indianapolis to the the state library, or other places like Shortridge High School, I had decided that Jean Garrigue was somebody that I should spend some time looking into. I had known her name. I had read, a few of her poems from time to time, and she was also from Indiana. And I happened to be, even though I was retired, I was still living in Bloomington, and I thought I'd like to find out something or more about this person. And I think it may have been coincided, in fact, with a project that Jenny Kander had initiated. Jim, you know about this, and I'm sure you do too, Susan, but she wanted to do an anthology of Indiana poets. And that meant, she came to me and asked if I would help in locating and these poets. And I thought, well, sure. What do you mean by Indiana poets? Which is the first question. Living, dead, living and dead. And as a result of those discussions, she and Charles, the co-editor, decided that this should be a comprehensive and reliable and real spread of Indiana poets, which would include people who were born in Indiana, obviously, and stayed in Indiana. And that particular group was fairly small. But then there were the people who were born in Indiana but then left. And there were the people who had never, were born elsewhere and came to the state, especially in more recent years. And all the half of the living poets of Indiana in, say, 2000 or so on and so forth, are probably people who had been born elsewhere. But anyway, it was decided to do a sort of broad thing and to go back as far as it's made sense in the past and pick up poets, that some of whom had been entirely forgotten, unjustifiably so. And I think that's where I stumbled into Jean, and realized that from just doing minimal research that she had, she had lived an important part of her life in Indianapolis, and there I was in Bloomington. And I thought, I need to find out more about this person. And it just started from there. And I thought at the time, well, I could, this is somebody who obviously has been left behind for reasons that don't make much sense to me, because these poems are very accomplished, and when they're good, they're sensational. They're wonderful poems. And I thought, well, and it turns out she had done a fair bit of writing when she was a student, a high school student, and she was on the board of the high school newspaper, which is called the Shortridge Echo. And this was a very, very popular school project, by the way. And I think it was the first one in the country where a high school actually produced a daily newspaper. And there were so many people interested in doing it that at Shortridge, they had a completely separate and different editorial staff for each day of the week. And Jean talked her way into being on Thursdays staff, and she also managed to talk whoever needed to be talked to into just doing an op-ed column, or what we would today call an op-ed column. And she just wrote about all kinds of things, books she had read, obviously, and then about her neighborhood occasionally, and a movie she's gone to, or a play she's gone to, and that sort of thing. And it also reflected her education. She was reading a lot of books that are fairly famous. At the same time, she was also reading some popular literature that were very popular at the time. Books that have been forgotten. And she was writing very well. Her writing was very, very good. And so I thought maybe I could do a little book here about Jean Garrigue's, young years, her Indiana years. And out of that project came an essay that was put into the Historical Society Journal a few years ago. I should say more than a few years ago. And I can remember telling a couple of friends here when I was in Woodstock, New York, for a reading, and I was telling them about this little project I was doing, and I said, it's a very controlled thing. I'm just interested in her, her Indiana years. And when she was through with her, what she considered her education, or the first parts of it, she then undertook a dream that she had grown to spend a lot of time dreaming, which was to go and be a bohemian in Greenwich Village, which is what she did. But I could just write up all this stuff about her Indiana years and collect all of these writings, which were moldering away in libraries. And it would be a nice, tidy little item. And I just said, I'm not doing a full biography at all. And this man and his wife, who I was telling this story to, this woman looked at me, and you have to, this is a visual, she just nodded her head at me, as if to say, yeah. And so one thing led to another, and, it became really very interesting what happened to her when she got to New York. She was she came to New York at an enormously busy, fruitful, upheaved time. It was March of 1940. The Second World War had started, 6 months before, but the United States was neutral. It was, and it was not going to get into the war for another year and a half. But New York was filling up with all kinds of people who were terrified of Hitler and Mussolini and Franco, and they wanted to go where there might be peace. Well, that didn't last very long. So anyway, I got to the point where I said, there's a lot of little stuff that I've found that if anybody else was to come along and would take an interest in Jean, it would really help them a great deal if
Right.
I would leave some kind of a record behind. And that's how it eventually developed. And I was able to say to my friend, it was 2 or 3 years ago, I said, I know too much. I can't stop, really. I mean, I have an obligation here. And, when I say I have an obligation here I am in the Adirondack Mountains of New York State, about 65 miles from Quebec, and 25 miles to the east of me is a town called Elizabethtown, which is, of course, the county seat of the county I live in, Essex County. And just outside this community is a woman named Jean Garrigue, who turns out to be Jean's niece. And and I found this out at a party here in Keene Valley. Actually, I was telling somebody else about this project I had, and I was talking to a woman who was in the real estate business in this county, and had been for a long time. And real estate agents, they know everything. It seems to me about who lives where and who sold what and who bought what. And I was telling her about this poet who had lived in Indiana and then moved to New York and so on and so forth. And she's really very interesting. And she said, "What is her name?" I said, "Garrigue, Jean Garrigue." "How do you spell that?" she said. And I said, "Well, Garrigue." And she's the woman who said, there's a person named Garrigue that lives over on the Wadhams Road going out of Elizabethtown. And I said, "Really?" So as a result of that moment, I got out the phone directory. We used to have phone directories. These are the last years of the phone directory. And there she was. There was this person called Jean Garrigue. And I said, "This has got to be." I knew about Jean Garrigue. I knew that Jean had a sister named Marjorie, older sister, and that the older sister, Marjorie, had married a man named Fred, and they had a child. And she was named Jory. And I called this person on the phone. I said, "Excuse me, is it possible that you are related to Jean Garrigue?" And she said, "Well, yes." And so we talked for, about an hour. And we made an arrangement for me to go over and talk to her. And she's a perfectly wonderful person, and who has been collecting remnants of Jean's life, partly because this is what her mother, Jean's sister, Marjorie, spent many years doing after Jean died. Jean died, when she was 60 years old. And then her sister Marjorie, this was in 1972, and Jean's older sister Marjorie lived until I think 1999. And Marjorie devoted herself to trying to preserve Jean's reputation, and so she also lived her last years in that house in E-Town, Elizabethtown, and when she died, Jory decided to keep doing the same thing, and she was for a while, in fact, the executor of Jean's. So anyway, there my commitments became, almost personal, not just to Jean, but this woman, Jory, who I know and I see, rather frequently, and we're good friends. And so I have this extra help, as it were, that comes from the family.
It's such an amazing story, Roger. I mean, it almost makes you think that you were fated to help keep her story alive.
Yeah, it's weird because it's something that it came to me that I didn't go out and look for. But as I say, I started by helping somebody do an anthology. I have to put Humpty Dumpty together here. There's 10 million pieces that you've got to try to arrange chronologically, or in at least coherently, and before anybody can go in there and I don't know what. But it is long, and that's going to be the big gripe about it. And so I've had to think about, can I make I mean, when I add this up, it comes to over 300,000 words. And, I mentioned that to Scott Sanders, whom you know, Susan. He nearly fell
Right.
off the chair, but you
That's
just
pretty
keep
amazing.
doing the work, and it, the words add up. What the thing that I've done it deserves to be preserved as it is, and then it can be,
Oh, it
as long as
does.
that is preserved somewhere, it can be reduced in significant way. I think a lot of the letters that I quote from, I could do a lot less quoting from, and there are, I like the little things that happen to her along the way, or the friends that she makes for a brief time, or or the occasional odd things that she does. Though those all seem to me to be, yeah,
That makes the
and you can
story,
see
really.
her. I mean, if you followed all the way through her relationship with Josie, you know, that got to be so painful and ended so terribly, at the end, where she just um, she yelled. The last time Jean saw Josie before Josie had to go to the hospital for good, she yelled her out of the house, and was calling her, just destructive names because she had, they had an uneven relationship, and I think Jean,
And to me, the relationship between Jean and I mean, that triangle of Jean and Josie and Stanley Kunitz was really
yeah,
fascinating. The quotations from the letters and that my guess is that probably coincided with a lot of
yeah,
painful and but
yeah.
also ecstatic poetry, that she wrote, so but it's a very interesting section of her
Hmm.
life, I think, and
And
part
it's
of her
it's nice to
story.
see and that the two of them, Stanley and Jean, were able to later on you know, they would find themselves in a taxi together briefly, and 4 or 5 years after their relationship was over, crying, and and
Mm.
Stanley having just married his next wife, Elise Asher, and so on. The other staggering moment was hearing. I talked to Stanley Moss on the phone one time for a good long while, and Stanley Moss knew her, for most of her adult life. They had roomed together. I don't think they were lovers particularly, but they roomed together because they were both broke back in the 40s, and he told me that Stanley Moss told me that Stanley Kunitz told him years after Jean died that Jean's letters to him were the best things she ever wrote, and they are gone. And I don't
They're
really know,
gone. Oh,
number one, are they really, really, really gone, or has somebody got them somewhere? Are they sequestered in some place that we don't know about? Or did he give them back to her, and she destroyed them? It really does help you see and know the work, the work the person lived to present is always, it seems to me, sharpened and outlined
right.
by what really happened and the real miseries that Jean went through.
Requiem. In the sudden white silence, where are you? It seems I carry a letter to you, but the mouth of the mailbox is choked with snow, and the box billows, swollen to twice its size by the thick coating of so many flakes already fallen for hours. I think then to telephone you. Seeing a booth, its panes pasted over and opaque like a half-marbled sentry box. But the floor is so deep in snow that I cannot pull the door to. Even the books are thick in it, and the mouthpiece is sifted over. Balked, I walk into the park of the trees of this new foliage. False orchard, bewildering like a fruitless spring. From afar strikes one bell, practicing to be heard. Is it you calling? No, only my heart tolling. Published in Studies for an Actress and Other Poems, 1973. This was one of 3 poems on the death of her lover, journalist Josephine Herbst.
Do you remember a couple of poems that you ran across and you thought, these are great? They need to be
Yeah.
kept. We need to be able to find them easily when we need them.
Well, yeah, I mean, Jean was not, shall we say, totally forgotten. She was. There were a number of people who worked on her behalf after she died, and her poems were. There was a selection of her poems produced in 1992 at the University of Illinois Press, and that was in large part because I think I'm just guessing this, because the best review, or one of the very best reviews of her work, was written by Lawrence Lieberman, who taught at the University of Illinois, when he reviewed her new and selected poems. And I think that maybe it was easy then for the people who were taking care of Jean's reputation and papers, after her death, to turn to the University of Illinois for help, and they did produce the selected poems in 1992. And her poems are in the contemporary American poetry anthologies, but represented by about 2 poems or 3 poems, and there were so many, more poems and bigger and better poems, and actually better than big, probably too big for an ordinary anthology, because some of her, as you probably know, her best poems are very long and fulsome.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a moment or a kind of an experience you had as you were starting to look into Jean that where you like I think Susan and I are both kind of wondering, like, what was there a switch that went off, or was it kind of more of a gradual thing that got you sort of down this path?
Well, it was gradual. I mean, I was, when I started doing this, I said, okay, I got to do this. I had to collect the books. I had to find all of her books, and I also said I need to do this chronologically. And her early poems are, um, they're not her strongest. I mean, they're well crafted, um, um, and but they're just a little. I mean, her poems got richer as she grew older, and as she came more and more to feel that life was essentially a tragic affair. She came to be greatly fond of great tragedy, particularly King Lear. She went to see King Lear in her 50s and was just knocked over by it. But he felt that the experience of living in this world was one in which um, uh, one was confronted by what she would call ordinary reality, which was something that got in the way of or prevented access to what she considered to be the real reality of life, the basic and fundamental uh, um, necessities of one's spiritual life. I mean, she belongs to a whole generation of artists of this kind who, I suppose, attribute their beginnings to early Romanticism, where Wordsworth can say in one of his early poems that you know um, complains about uh, um, people getting and spending, and getting and spending. They lay waste their lives. Um, and so the turning away from the ordinary life, the life of the middle class, the life of that has been produced by, as she would say, science and the machine. Um, the ideology of progress, the ideology of scientific increased scientific awareness and progress and and um, and conformity too. Conformity. I mean, this is a kind of life that came to be, especially in the 19th century, and especially in England, very, very tightly wound and controlled.
in your book, you talk about the 1940s in New York, and it kind of going back to all of the writers who came from Europe around that time, and it created a conversation that led to modernism out of romanticism. I wonder if you could say something about who some of those people were that she interacted with, and and that affected her writing and thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. You know, the United States, or New York City, benefited enormously from the terror that was developing in Europe in the 30s, and this kind of terror was largely aimed at people who had alternative notions of how to live, and alternative notions of what good art would be, and so the surrealists and others were swarming in this direction, and they helped to develop um, our own local versions of surrealism, and certainly the New York School of painting owed a huge debt to German immigrants, and so on and so forth. And um, and Jean already knew in the 20s about Bohemia. Um, People had been gathering in Greenwich Village for a good long time. In fact, Manhattan itself, and I suppose focused mostly in Greenwich Village, in that area, there was a very big, political movement underway, which was sometimes socialist and sometimes communist, and sometimes it was, who were the people who killed McKinley? Um, I forget the name of the ism there, but I think Jean developed a need to get away from the kind of strictures that she found in her family. I mean, her family, her father was somebody who read a Bible every day of his life, apparently, and he was also a very gentle man, and he also was a writer. He wrote stories, which are stories that you would set alongside James Whitcomb Riley's poems. They're about the sort of Hoosier people, the ordinary people of the Hoosier world, and they talk a little bit the way some of James Whitcomb Riley's figures do talk. But the desire to get away from the given world was very, very strong in Jean, and a logical step was to go to Greenwich Village and try it out, and she benefited greatly from it, and she also griped about it, and she she had finally had enough of it towards the end of her life, and so on, but she never stopped looking beyond what was given and what was expected and what was so-called natural, or what was supposed to be real. And she went looking for the things that were just realer, more important than convention.
Did she ever think about moving back to the Midwest?
I don't think so, but um, she fell in love with the far West. She had wonderful actually a series of wonderful experiences of working in the far West. Um, when she was invited to go to the San Francisco Art Poetry Center in the 50s, it was a wonderful experience for her. Robert Duncan, who introduced her for her reading there in a very wonderful and smart description of Jean and Jean's poetry. Found her several readings in the Bay Area, and they also lined her up with a woman up in the University of Washington named Carolyn Kaiser, and she went up there and gave a reading
Yeah,
up there.
interesting.
And that all happened over a course of maybe 3 or 4 weeks in 1957. But then she went back there to teach at the University of Washington in 1970, and she just fell in love with the place. And the students loved her, and they took her around and showed her various sites, and she really she hated to leave there. She went to the chairperson there, Robert Heilman, and to sort of say, is there a possibility? You got something? Can I stay? you know, and she. This is also the moment in her life when she was giving up this apartment that she had had for 20 years in New York, which she loved and hated both, and was glad to get rid of finally. And she was moving into this arts commune on the west side of Manhattan, which was a good thing for her, but it was a kind of heartless, soulless place. I actually gave a talk on her down there several years ago. And this is what they call West Beth, which is still an arts cooperative in the middle of Manhattan. And but it was an old factory which had been, fixed up into apartments with huge high roofs, and wide hallways. You could drive a truck down.
New York, summertime. Those rumors and orchestras of the playgrounds of summer, children, parked trucks of the oval cheeks and sleek skin of the cut watermelon, bells of the traveling parlors and snow wagons of ice cream. Your pale, stifling room, glazed by the porcelain light of pulled Venetian slats. Half naked now we sit, our arms so bare we seem to touch, though we don't do so, and so much else exposed through your walk-up's open doors, the husband in his underwear, the sweating housewife slumped on a kitchen chair, Van Gogh prints and mottos on the walls. Here's the time to live, and why not now? In your room's glazed pallor, the ovens burning toast, your many mirrors garbled, parts of light and float. Touch is burning up the toast. The mirrors scorch that hold our drowned-in shadow faces in them. Boop of the saxophone. Those sugared waltzes slurping. It is, I am, screams summer in a heat. It is, you are. My stupid blood beats back. And you, child of the violent season, who buy your playtime in the bars, who blaze away the moment like they do upon their hopscotch squares, or by some street lamp shrilling late with cards and fires, they tell me how your nature is blent with what's so shaped and colored still by this half-cracked omphalos of the fevers of our screwed-up fate, oh crazes of the dynamo. your restless energy that thirsts, your forced elations that rockets burst their salvos upon nothingness. A spendthrift tempest that I hear your hammering heart beat out to the convulsive pulse our motor generations make. Part 2. And you, child of the violent season, the summer's kissing you. It's Blague. It's I who kiss. It's I who strive in blood to get this mixing done of motored air that winds with the continuous burr of exiled insects dead. Some desiccated grief and fear, now in the populous midst of energies that strain with passion at the leash. Because it is the time to live. Because exploding chemistries tell us so and tell of the hurled at star. We hear the howling dog in space. Our fate, like his, is brief and short, succinct as melting summer on the limbs, though in the senseless go of bodies to get wet and faint, we may feel less isolate. Now, put up in quietude, freed of that frenzied churn, it's you and you and you who still beat on to make the wild percussion in my mind, though it's the mourning dove that moans and deafening crickets grind against those pastimes of the horn, the sizzling locust's wind, and the tattered hollyhock's decline. That bounding ball, the radios that played around your court, your frittered pulse that leapt with the stertorous breath, that twist and impulse into flame, of these I make my monody. To action that pretends it knows, to necessity that says, it was before we chose what we're burning in, to our splendor and our waste. From Country Without Maps, published in 1964.
Roger, what are you working on now? At what stage are you in the project, and where do you want to end up? What do you want to end up producing out of this, your research and your work related to Jean?
This book with its appendix and its clumsy footnotes. The footnotes are the way they are because I have to have a record of where each of these letters or documents is located in an archive of 95 books, which are still uncatalogued. They're just these 95 boxes, and somebody thankfully has gone through them, and they've identified the general characteristics of the papers in these boxes, but they have not been cataloged. And so, if anybody is going to come behind me and work on Jean Garrigue, they're going to have to, if they, look at my book in some way or another, which is one of the reasons why I would want it published. And I'm thinking of, I'm planning to try to. I am not planning to try. I am planning to present this to the IU Press.
Good.
And
no, it's such a necessary book. I mean, and it's not just about Jean. It's about the time she lived in. It's about all, you have stories about the people she knew, Stanley Kunitz, Josephine Herbst, Dylan Thomas. Yeah, I mean, it's just, it really needs to be published. And when I'm thinking, I just have to say how much I admire the fact that you have done this project so selflessly. And so it's like, planting a small tree and knowing you'll never see it, develop into a shade tree or something, because of all the work you've done and all the information you've gathered. And it's basically for that poetry. And you have also spent your life as a poet. yourself and your own poetry is very fine. So it's wonderful.
Song in Sligo. I had a bear that danced, a monkey on a stick, a dog that begged, a cat that moused, and slouching by a ditch, a rook in black of silk. I had those birds that rode above the levels of the cove at late, long twilight in the north, when the brand of the sun still burned. Above the shoddy bridges of the Garrige, I had a boat that beat up levels of the reed-flagged shore and rack-ruined battlements. I had a boat and traveled with the birds that flew against me in the breath of winds. To each bend of the river its own muse of samite-backed and sable-legged young swans who winter from the Bay of Rosses here. I had an island for my own one want, a ring of prophecy and scent, where trees were sloped upon a moss of turf, one ruined wall that I could sit against and dip a ragged net to catch a fish, of rainbowed armor in the scales of night. I had a love who spoke to me of wars. It was the summer of the fires, blackout by desolating energy. You silken tatters of the sliding flow, I had your voices and your leafy pools. I have these poisons we must choose.